If you all want to take seats and begin, we are ready to go. Huh? It's very dark. Okay. Yeah, it's okay. Good evening, everybody. Very excited and very honored for today's session. It's our monthly Ambedkar lecture series that we do at Harvard. And this month, we have a very distinguished speaker, activist, scholar, intellectual, and a very spiritually deeply connected human being, dear sister Cynthia, who has come all the way from Bangalore, and she's here on a US tour, and she's given talks across. She just came in yesterday night from Atlanta, and today morning she was teaching visiting a class. She was teaching a course on feminism. She talked about, and she's critical about these concepts. I was very lucky, and I'm sure we will be in a short while, to learn these new concepts that don't get discussed very much. The idea of feminist movement itself is a very complicated domain, and it has to be revisited multiple times as we discuss. And so when we talk about caste, untouchability, the Dalit rights, the issue of Dalit patriarchy, and as well as the issue of how Dalit movement sees itself in light of feminist as well as other radical social justice movement is important. And thus, in that vein, Cynthia is here with us. The talk she very kindly suggested about rethinking Dalit feminism. We have a genre of Dalit feminism existing for the past 20 years, 10 years now. Very much oriented through academic discourses, and of course academic discourses come with its own lacunas and all its unattended organic realities. And so that's why we need organic intellectuals to really veer us, to direct us and enlighten us how or what are the ways to look at it. This lecture is also primarily important for us because as the Dalit movement, we are very concerned with the notion of feminism, more importantly, womanism, and why the most impacted group of the caste system is primarily women. And the whole system of caste, the edifice of caste, is designed to work when it's oppressing women. So if the caste system is working, it's primarily actually oppressing women. And so when we have to address the issues of Dalit movement, it is primarily we have to address the issue of women and Dalit women and beyond Dalit women issues as well. I would like to quickly acknowledge dear brother Jelani Cobb, who is here with us, who is also a professor at Columbia University of Journalism, and he keeps on enlightening us with New Yorker column. Without further ado, I would like to briefly introduce Cynthia. Cynthia has been writing on social justice issues for a very, very long time. She started off working with the community, with the NGO sectors, and her own story is so immaculate and as well as profound for us, many of us in the movement, to really relate to it. Many of us don't understand or don't want, shy off from actually taking a stand or telling your own stories and then coming to the topic. Many times it's abstract construction about some ideas, but Cynthia comes with very autobiographical, powerful narrative, and that's why we would look forward to your talk. She writes regularly in mainstream Indian media. Her writings are available online, and she's currently working on a book project, which I was very excited to hear in the morning, and she's going to take on the issue that we are going to perhaps discuss today. So we look forward to reading your work sometime soon. And Cynthia is also involved in the Dalit women movement, a very, very, very important figure at a national level. And recently, I mean, she's been organizing on various for various causes, and her work is something I think we should all need to know and refer to, because this is something that will give us or make us shake from our slumbers or otherwise lopsided analysis. So, without further ado, Cynthia, we welcome you.
I'm really very happy to be here. I believe that these are, connections that happen, in due time. So this has actually, I was just saying that this visit was supposed to be in June last year, and then it got put off because of for certain technical reasons. And then after that, when I met Suraj in August in Bangalore, I happened to tell him I'm planning to come to the US next year, and he said, "You come to Harvard, I'll arrange a lecture for you." So in a sense, that invitation is what has brought me here today. So I just want to say that. So I want to thank you very much for that, for actually having followed through on that, and it's actually working. I'm also here because of the networking and support of a large number of groups and individuals. And I just want to acknowledge the work of Equality Labs and Tenmari, who has been actively involved with the Dalit History Month. She initiated this Dalit History Month, which was started by her in the year 2015. Because, as you know, the Dalit history is something that has suffered erasure. It's not that in the mainstream, it's not that it doesn't exist, but it does exist in the lives and in the oral narratives and in other active artifacts of the Dalit people themselves. But that history has not been much written about or talked about, but we need to reclaim that. And so she has started that process. So this year, they featured me as their Dalit History Month speaker, and there's this chain of events which I have been part of. One of their important events was the release of the caste in the US survey. Unfortunately, it was a day when the heaviest snowfall happened in Boston. So I was held back to do another program in New York and in the UN, the CSW. So I stayed back. They went ahead. They escaped the storm, but I was unable to join. But the release of the book has, you might be aware, has created a lot of interest in the issue of caste among the diaspora. So what is this about caste that is so persistent over centuries, across geographies, across generations, across ideologies, across religious philosophies? What is this about? So we cannot but study it. There is one other comparative phenomenon known as patriarchy. So this caste or Brahmanism and patriarchy have to be studied. They share a lot of commonalities, and in fact, in many ways, you could say that in our society, they feed one on another. And I was just as part of the work that I did here, it was an unexpected thing, but it happened, and I just want to say that it was a huge opportunity. A day or two after I arrived in the US, we got a call. Tenmari got a call from Al Jazeera, and they were wanting Tenmari to appear on a talk show called The Stream, in which they were going to discuss a documentary they had commissioned to talk to the family or around the issue of a so-called honor killing that took place uh, in Tamil Nadu in the year 2016. And that was the couple was Shankar and Kausalya. Shankar was a Dalit boy who married Kausalya. They were studying together. They fell in love. The parents did not agree to her getting married. They decided to go ahead and get married anyway, even though they were still studying. They decided to move away from their hometown because of the risk and stay closer to in the city. And when they were 8 months after their marriage, when they were out shopping, the parents tried to snatch her 2 or 3 times, but then he went and got her back. And so these people had gone shopping, and in the public street, four guys with machetes came and attacked both of them. She managed to fall into a place where they couldn't reach her. She fell behind a metal, object, so they couldn't reach her. But they certainly set upon this boy, killed him on the spot, and fled. The whole thing got recorded in the shop. It happened in a public street, and there was a shop ahead across the road, which whose CCTV recorded the whole thing. And so this became, of course, a huge issue across the country, and we did a lot of writing around it. And I happened to be reporting for the Hindustan Times. I wrote a detailed piece on it, spoke to the people at that time in 16. So when the call from Al Jazeera, Teenmur immediately said, Cynthia should go, not I, because I'm more than me, and she has done some work. She knows this issue better. She's there on the ground. She should go. So I ended up on this show, and so we were discussing. And then what actually emerged ultimately was that the media felt that they had covered both sides of the story by talking to the girl who took a stand against her parents, and as a result her father has been convicted along with three or four other of the conspirators. Six of them were convicted, uh, and her mother, her uncle, and another juvenile who was not named uh, were acquitted, given the benefit of the doubt. So this was the condition. So the filmmaker who was commissioned to cover this story, she spoke to Kausalya, and she spoke to the Kausalya's family, and so that was the subject of the discussion. But I was asking, where is the Dalit voice here? Kausalya, though she's the survivor, is a non-Dalit. The parents are non-Dalit. So the response was that the family was not willing to come on camera. They were afraid to come on camera, uh, and because they have to live there and work there. Whereas if you look at the footage in the film, they played that footage. Her younger brother, who was on camera, and the grandmother were talking to the filmmaker. So she asked the grandmother. She asked the grandmother in the film, "Are you? Now this is your girl. She has made a mistake. So if she comes back, will you accept her back?" The grandmother says, "Yes. What to do? She's our girl. We have to forgive her and accept her." And this young fellow says on camera, "I will kill both you and her if you do any such thing." The mother, who's also interviewed, she's after her acquittal. She's sitting on the doorstep of her home, and the mother is saying, "I told this girl not to fall in love and all that. I was the one who insisted that she should go to college. But after that, and I made her promise, and she promised that she won't fall in love with anybody. I told her, if you do this, I will kill you." She's saying this on camera, even after the court acquitted her, on the uh, 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 giving her the benefit of the doubt. So the girl is saying, "See, these people threatened me. They kidnapped me. They conspired against my marriage, and still, they have not been convicted." This is her feeling. So everybody is talking about this, but the silent, invisibilized voice is of the Dalit. And then that was what I pointed out. I'm pointing out that even the media has not thought of asking. But if you ask, they are the ones who lost the boy. He was killed. The family has already lost a mother because they're motherless children. The father brought them up on his own without, even after the mother was lost in their childhood. But there is no social support for them to speak. They're afraid. But people who have been convicted, they're still threatening murder on camera. This is the contrast. So it really illustrates the silencing, uh, the violence, the normalizing that happens to this kind of huge injustice that occurs in the lives of Dalits. So I'm using this only as an illustration. So as I said, I'm just showing how pervasive and persistent is this system that works in this manner. So I'm not sure. I'm sure most of you are well informed on this, but just I need to spend about 5 minutes encapsulating for you very briefly what caste or Brahmanism really means. because without that understanding, some of it will become very difficult to understand. So please forgive me, those of you who are familiar with caste and its, and its conceits. But I really need to talk about what it means. So this is based on a particular a myth of creation, which is found in the Rig Veda, one of the most important Hindu scriptures. It's in a portion called the Purusha Sukta. Purusha means man, so it's the creation of man. It's the creation myth, the Brahmanical myth of creation, in which the creator god Brahma, uh, you know, uh, creates Brahmin from his head, and the Kshatriyas or the warriors from his arms, and the Vaishyas or the traders from his legs, that is thighs, and the Shudras from his legs below the knee. Now watch carefully the progression. These are all mutually exclusive categories and occupations. So knowledge and ritual power is with the Brahmin. Political and political power and arms are with the Kshatriyas, and economic power and commerce are with the Vaishyas. What is left? The productive activities. They are considered the slaves. Why are they the slaves? Because they are born to do this work for their betters, who are, this system claims that they are twice born. Dvija, what's the proof? The proof is that they are born into that community. And the other human beings can only aspire to the next level of being twice born if they are faithful to their caste duties in this world. That is how they can attain the next status, that is being twice born. And how do you identify a twice born? The male, the first thing is they're born in that community. Second thing, they are male, and they're eligible to wear a cross thread, a sacred thread, which is given to the male at initiation. Okay, so this is the twice born this is, it is based on this theory of rebirth, the karma. So you do good works, and that will determine what kind of birth you will emerge out into the next birth. So you see you see how is, so all the hard work, all the artisans, all those who have knowledge and skill about anything to do with livelihood or any productive activity in the society, they are all considered slaves. So they are the productive. So all their work is geared to serving their betters, their caste superiors. This is one side. The other side is, now how does this get replicated? This is by the system of endogamy, which is mutually. So the marriage happens only within the caste. So there is no mixing of castes. And how is it achieved? It is achieved by okay. So what is the role of the woman in this? She doesn't have any role other than the fact that she is a reproducer of the next generation. So her reproductive role is the arbiter of her destiny. So she is born, and her duty is to serve her husband and produce the next generation. And so therefore, to achieve this purity of birth, the rule is to marry these girls very young, before they even know what sexuality or reproduction is all about, so that they are grown and they're only seen as important for this kind of work. So there is an utter there's an extraction of labor of the working classes, the productive working classes. There is a total control over reproductive labor of the women. Okay, so then where are the Dalits in this scheme? Because we told of four productive. So the Dalits are subhuman. They are not human beings. They are outcasts and untouchables. So they are relegated to the ritually impure tasks. Everything that has to do with handling any kind of body fluid or any kind of death. So digging graves, pronouncing news of death, working and maintaining graveyards, carrying away dead cattle, skinning the hide, dealing with the bones, manual scavenging and sanitation in the villages. These are the tasks that are relegated to the Dalits. It's not that everybody only does that. There are other communities where there's no fixed duty as such. There are those who, like the Mahar community, for instance, they don't have a fixed caste duty except that they are supposed to do certain things in the village. They're supposed to make some announcement, look after a certain amount of land, and control the water irrigation, channels, water, this kind of thing. So overall, they are not considered mainstream, so they have to live outside the village because they do impure things and nasty things. They are supposed to live outside the village in their own settlement. And has this is not something that, something written centuries ago, and these are lived out even to this day. Then there's another I told you about the Purusha Sukta. All this I'm talking about, and the rules that govern the practice of livelihood or whatever of the Dalits is codified in a book known as the Manusmriti, which is also Manu is the name of the person who writes it, but he's not cooking it up. He's codifying what is already in practice, and that is that it's a total it's a law. It's actually a law, the law of Manu. And for instance, and everybody feel, I mean, those who are the RSS, that is the Hindu fundamentalist group, which is right now behind the political party in power. They claim that that is the one who wrote, I mean, who wrote the book, or he initiated it, Golwalkar. He says that the law of Manu is a book for the Hindus, is the law book for the Hindus. What does this law book say? It says that if a Dalit or is taught the Vedas, or they hear Sanskrit, they have to be punished by pouring molten lead into the ear. If they speak harshly to a Brahmin, they have to cut off the lips. This is a kind of punishment. And it also says that if a Brahmin kills anybody, or commits a very major crime, he gets a slap on the wrist with a twig. I'm not kidding. This is, I mean, he gets a very mild punishment, you know. And so there's this. So based on your birth, you are eligible for certain kinds of punishment. I'm not cooking this up. This is very much available on the web. Please verify for yourself what I'm saying is right or wrong. And also it says, for instance, that a buffalo, a woman, a drum, and a dog are worth only to be beaten. This is one of the shlokas in that. And then it also enjoins that Dalits have no right to any property. They should not live in houses made with walls. They always be in huts, and no proper roof should be there. It should be a grass roof. They should not cook in vessels made of metal. They're not supposed to own anything of value. They have to use or wear only old clothes. They have to um, live on. They should beg for their food. Even if they do work, they go and sweep the streets, and clean the toilets of the of the rest of the village. But for that work, they're not to be paid. Their only entitlement is old clothes and old food. Even to this day, in Gujarat, where there are lots of dry latrines, people always keep aside in the night. They make two extra rotis and keep aside for the sweepers who will come in the morning. No question of they will make fresh rotis in the morning for themselves, but they're supposed to be given yesterday's food. It still happens. It's still a rule. So, and you will find even the government, when they build houses, government sanctioned welfare buildings, Harijan colony separate. It's not part of the layout will not include them in that setup. So, in other words, so that all these practices still exist. What was the Manusmriti is a document which is written in the 5th or 6th century BC AD. Those practices still exist. There's another very common thing. There's a saying, "Na Sri Swatantrya Arhati." No woman is worthy of freedom. And it says when she is a girl, she is under her father. When she is young, she is under her husband. And when presumably the husband is no longer alive, she is supposed to be subject to her son. So a male always has to of blood relation should always be rule over the woman. This is the secondary status that Manusmriti accords. To this day, this is the rule that is practiced in our culture. The mother, however badly she's treated by the son or the son's family, she will not go and normally live with the daughter, because the patriarchal rule is that it is a shame for the daughter's relatives to stay with the daughters in the daughter's family. That patriarchal norm is still very much a part of and responsible for a lot of the kind of injustice and unhappiness that elders face in the country. So these are the ways in which, and so that's also at the basis of the son preference. In India, as you know, we have a very large gap between the number of males being born and the number of females, what we call the sex ratio, because when the woman conceives, they go to check what baby she's bearing in her womb, and if it's a female, other than the first child, they don't usually intervene, but if the second child, it had better be a boy. If not, then she's almost certainly they're going to ask her to have an abortion. And repeatedly so, if she keeps on conceiving girls, and it's considered. I know of cases where the woman has been sent home, or they never come to. Once a baby is born, they never come to take the child home from the hospital. The mother's family have to take her and keep her with the two girls. They reject the wife and the relationship. I know of this personally, because I work with women in the field. And so, in this kind of son preference, this kind of injustice, gender and caste injustice, is ingrained in this ideology, which are considered scriptural. So therefore, they have a sanction which is divine, and they make the rules for everything else that happens. So I mean, with this introduction, I would like to say that when did this whole system start getting challenged? So there has been a challenge in society right from day one, when right from the beginning. Even as you say, even if you talk about Buddhism, even there are scholars who believe that Buddha was a person who was actually reacting against the Brahminical system, and therefore set up this anti-caste, and egalitarian philosophy. Then, if you go to the south, there is the tradition of the Bhakti tradition, which actually starts in Tamil Nadu, and slowly you see it proceeding from there northwards. And over a period of time, it starts in Tamil Nadu. There are a number of poets who talk about a personal God. They talk about the human being, the God being able to relate to the human, and so the bhakti means devotion. So God responding to the devotee, that kind of a relatable God, not an impersonal God who is far away and doesn't involve himself in his life, which is the imagination of the Brahminicals, kind. And as then when you come to Karnataka and central part of Deccan Plateau, in the 14th century, we have Basaveshwara, who was the one who actually set up a very powerful movement, anti-caste movement, and it became very popular very quickly. And so he initiated what is now known as the Lingayat religion. And you might be aware, some of you who follow India's news will be aware that very recently, just about a couple of weeks ago, there was a bid for, I mean, the government, they appealed to the government to say that we are a minority religion, we don't want to be part of the Hindu religion, because Basaveshwara was an anti-caste crusader and we don't believe in that. Whereas there is a streak, just as it happened in Buddhism, which brought in a kind of a priestly, which was not Basaveshwara's original idea, but they connected that with the Shaivite Hindu Shaivite tradition, and brought in a cadre of priests in that religion. So this was challenged, and finally now, after a lot of political upheaval, 3 or 4 people who were working for that got killed by unknown. Still, they haven't been able to crack those murders. So still now, finally that region has been, at least in the state of Karnataka, they have accepted that demand and sent it to the central government, to give approval, and that has put the central government in a bit of a spot. But that's a story we won't go into. And so, along with this comes the Varkari tradition in Maharashtra. There is Tukka, there is Chokamela. There are many others who also talk about the divine in a very personal way. Then there's also the Queen Mirabai. So they have, and all these protest traditions are actually protesting against. And there is the most one of the most iconic figures actually who hardly ever she's another best kept secret along with Ambedkar in the whole of world, in the world. Ambedkar's contribution to India has not been properly acknowledged, other than the fact that he's only seen as a Dalit leader. His entire large policy and economic vision has barely been touched and acknowledged. Along with him, there's another very arresting figure known as Akka Mahadevi, who was part of the Basaveshwaras. And Akka Mahadevi has this most brilliant mystic poetry that she talks about. And she was a rebel to the core, to the extent that because she desired to not to be married, she wanted to be single and continue to worship God, but they did not allow that. They made sure that they insisted that she should marry. Then she took a promise from her husband, who was a young ruler of a small town, saying that, okay, but you should never touch me. I'll marry you, but you should not touch me. He said okay because he wanted to marry her, but after that he could not resist touching her. So, in protest, she tore off her clothes and she said, I will never. Okay, it's because of my body that this is, you're doing this, right? So, I'm not a body anymore. I'm not a woman anymore. And she tears off her clothes and decides to remain without any clothes for the rest of her life. So, she's depicted as just being covered by her own hair. This was how radical she was even in those days. She's another, I would say that she's a proto-feminist, in the world. And her poetry survives. It's there very much around. These are all these people who have worked against caste. But these are all people's poets, mind you. They're all people who are not the mainstream. They're all rebels. Even within the Brahminical system, there were a few reformist voices. There was one person who is called Ramanujam, one Sri Ramanujam. So he is a Ramanujacharya, but they're all reformist within the Brahmin tradition. Okay. So this is at one level. But the real intellectual challenge came from Mahatma Jyotirao Phule, and he was the first person to critique Brahmanism. How he was the first person to study English, and he read The Rights of Man by Thomas Paine, and became aware about the up to date thinking. He read it even as it had just been published as a very new book. So as recent as, like, as fresh, as contemporary as that he started as the European Enlightenment, the same thing started here. So he started his first polemical work was a critique of the Dashavatara, which is the 10 rebirths of Vishnu, the god Vishnu. So it's a satirical dialogue, like a play. And so it is called Gulamgiri, which means slavery. So from day one, Phule's critique was that this system enslaves people's mind, body, and soul. So from that assumption, he worked strongly to promote education as the way forward. And he passed away just a year or two before our present hero, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, was born. But his work was very much alive. His wife, Savitribai, continued to live for several years after his death. So she wrote and she compiled his speeches. She continued his work, and so they took up. And the main important thing is they started schools for girls uh, of the backward classes and Dalit. So they are the initiators, the first people to allow the mind. Before that, as I told you, there's punishment for anyone who tried to study. There's severe punishment, social boycott, and stuff like that happened. Even Pule himself was taken out of school by his father because the Brahmin, some guru or some friend advised the father, you should take away your boy who will help you in your business, because they were actually flower traders. Pule means flower, so they used to trade in flowers. But then there were some teachers who knew that he was a very bright student, so they said, don't take him out of school, put him in school and let him continue. So he was put in a mission school, which was an English medium school, and that's how his life became we are all testimony to what he has done. And so when Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was born, his life begins, his public life begins when he comes to the US to study in Columbia. He was the first boy to finish, first Dalit boy to complete school, the first boy to go to college, and after that he won a scholarship and came to Columbia, and he studied economics, sociology, anthropology, and law, and also distinguished himself with a PhD work in London School of Economics. Plus, he took uh, the exam. He was a barrister at law in UK. He studied law both here and there. So he had a huge education in law and economics, and had a very powerful impact on that. But that is not exactly a direct story. But this is, in fact, basically background for to understand what we're going to talk about now. So, as I said, yes.
When was that?
When did
Yeah.
Ambedkar live in? He was born in 1890, 92, and he died at the age of 66 in 1956. Just in 1947, we won freedom from British, and so he was selected to mainly to chair the drafting committee for the Constitution, and he ended up actually writing most of it. So in the next 3 years, or less than 3 years, he finished writing it. And in on January the 26th, 1950, the Constitution was promulgated in India. And he continued as a law minister in the state, yeah, in the first cabinet. So, and he died in the year 1956. But before that, he did something very radical. But he believed that the the belief system was very harmful and enslaved people. So towards the end of his life, just 2 months in fact before he passed away, he personally converted to Buddhism and led 500,000 people from his community into Buddhism at the same time, just after him. So, as a result of which, that has had a profound impact on at least certainly the community in Maharashtra and other parts of the country. So, this is about the whole the whole superstructure of caste and its impacts. So, one of the important things about, we already noted that the role of women in this whole scheme is somewhat limited to their reproductive role. So what then of Dalit women? What how do they live out their fate or whatever their destiny? And see, the one thing that is unique to Dalit women, that does not happen to anybody else in the society, is that they're born into two particular kinds of occupations which no other women has to face. One is manual scavenging. You won't find any other section of society engaged in manual scavenging, and that too particularly women. Um, and that means, what it exactly means is that there are toilets which don't have commodes; they're just dry latrines. So then the excrement has to be cleaned out of it by broom or using a scraper or something. Then all that has to be collected by hand in a basket or bucket and carried far away and disposed of. To this day, many municipalities have not, though it has been banned by law, in practice, where there is water problem, or where, whatever, where there are people who are not committed to following the law, there's still the practice of dry latrines which continue. Because the water sealed toilets, there's often not enough water to drink. So there are practical issues, but that doesn't excuse the government for its non implementation of its own laws. That is one. And the men in that community are often let down into the underground drainage. And regularly we hear reports of people suffocating because of due to the poisonous fumes that exist in those places. Men go down and come back dead regularly, even in a city like Bangalore, Delhi, any. So the underground sewage system is rudimentary, because there are human cannon fodder which can be let down, and nobody sees the need to invest in mechanized systems because human beings are available to do this dirty work. That is the situation. So this is manual scavenging. The other one, which is a much more involved system, is that of Devdasis. The Devdasi literally means the servants of God. The servants is the female slaves of God. Dasa is male, Dasi is female. The Devdasis are uh, usually girls who are quote unquote married to the deity in a particular area of India. There are 3 or 4 temples where this practice occurs, and after that the girl is no longer supposed to marry a man. She cannot marry, but she's available. Any male who can pay has sexual access to her. So that is nothing but a ritualized system of prostitution for the girls. Earlier, in the earlier days, the system used to permit, the system was such that any man could keep her as a mistress and she could have children live there, or she's permitted to stay with her own family. Normally, the rule is, I told you that, girls have to be married. They have to be married very quickly before, any lapse takes place, any male gets access to her. So other than that, these are the only other women. So because they are not married, because they're married to God, they can stay in their husband and their parents home. They need not go away to the husband's house, you see. So they can stay, and their clients can, without stigma, visit them in their parents home. And so this is a very major system of, and so anyone, the highest, the most powerful male, or the one who pays the most, gets access to her the first time. And after that, it's a system, basically now it's nothing but a pipeline to put girls into the into trafficking for the sale of sex. So why do only Dalit girls have to undergo this? There is a very involved system which keeps this happening, keeps this pipeline of girls into this trafficking, and into what we call the red light areas, the areas of where prostitution take place. The reason is that I have heard myself. One man has told this to my face once. He saw a book I had made, including a lot of the lives of various kinds of women, women in India, profiles and her stories were a small compilation I had made with photos and a small write up about the woman. I had written about the Devdasi, that girl who's, because though she's a Devdasi, she has children and she doesn't earn enough, so she has to go to work as a casual, like a loader of in a mine. Yeah, mine. She has to load wagons, railway wagons. That story. Then this man said, "Madam, you've written the story. You don't know. If we don't have Devdasis, society will go to dogs. No family life will be feasible anymore. You don't know how important it is to have Devdasis around. So you will know now what it means." And so it's a very, so what happens is that in that area, which is a very resource poor area, there's hardly any water, there's no agricultural, no good agriculture possible, and so there's very little, the wages are very low, overall wages are low, and on top of that there is this tacit contract among landowners that they will not pay anything more than one fourth of the living wage in that area. So if the living wages are 100 rupees, they will pay 25 rupees. No way. And 25 rupees, as I said, comes to some 35 cents or something. The whole family is supposed to subsist on that 35 cents of, you know. So you cannot, there's no way you can survive. So wherever you go, you'll only get paid like that. And so that is why women, the only other option is to go into sex work. So and then there is also, of course, there's the police, there's the politician, all the business people who collude to keep these women, the young women and the young girls coming. All this happens in their like eight, when they're 10, 8, 9, and the girls don't understand. There's a ritual. They're all dressed up and taken into a ritual, so they don't fully understand what's actually going on, because the community feels that this is something they need to do, because they're also told that it's a blessing to the family, the God will be pleased with them, they're doing good to the village. These are also the inducements that are there to sweeten the deal for them. So this is how it happens. So in other words, Dalit women are good only for labor, dirty work, and for sexual exploitation. So this is the status accorded to Dalit women in the society. Yes.
I'm curious, who are the patrons of,
Any male who can pay. Obviously, it's any male who can pay. So it's a total reinforcement of caste, class, gender, assertion, superiority,
including other Dalit men.
maybe, but I don't think that is men. Dalit men have that much of economic surplus to pay for sex. That's what I would say. I told you there is a conspiracy to keep them poor.
Because I reckon from what you said, like one of the people who perhaps you interviewed or who came to you said that if this system doesn't continue, that the society or the community will go to the dogs. So I was trying to understand how they would have the
Yes. This is
capacity
basically the
to-
man saying that we should have sexual access to the women. Okay. I mean, I'll just address that along with what I'm just going to say now. So, in other words, now we also have, now having said all this, now that brings me to the topic of the day. Now, after this huge background, now I don't have to say much. With this background, you will understand without my saying very little that why we need to rethink this term Dalit feminism. Okay, so the term was Dalit feminism, and I said we need to rethink it because the first time I heard this term, it was coined actually by a very eminent scholar who's no longer with us. Her name is Dr. Sharmila Rege, and she used to work in Pune University, and she came up with this term. The first time I heard it was as a student of women's studies when I was doing my masters. Not long ago. It was in the late 90s. I did my masters in the 90s after long years of working and so on because people felt I should take a master's degree. I was already way ahead of of the subject, but I was studying. I came across this term, and there was a visceral rejection, which my gut actually churned and uh, went into a spasm when I heard that word, that phrase, and it took me a while to work out the reason. I had by that time already been working in the women's sector for about 20 years, 15, 20. I started working quite young. And I had worked at a national level with a lot of women's organizations and, quite well known women's movements and groups. And I had myself been a gender trainer. So it took me a while to work out, but then I realized what it was. At that point, I must say that I was not even aware of my gender, of my Dalit identity. My caste identity had not yet come to my knowledge. This was some years before that. So then I realized what it was. I realized that whatever I knew about Dalits and whatever I knew about feminism, they they didn't match. They were mutually exclusive. So to put this term together, it actually constituted, to my sense, an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms. So then, now unpacking the meaning of that is when I began to understand why feminism had not been effective in certain areas and had it been quite helpful and useful in others. And so I must say that I don't knock feminism as an ideology or as a means of understanding the world, critiquing patriarchy and all that. I'm also not knocking the impacts and the advances of women's rights that women's movement in India has done. I have been part of it too, so I do own that. But what they did not do is important. What are the, like, for instance, their area was in the area of protection of women from sexual violence. They strengthened the rape laws. There was a process due to which a very young girl, a minor, was accused of, was raped by two men in a police station. But the judgment came out that because she was habituated to sex, she probably instigated the men to have sex with her. So it was consensual, not rape. This was the judgment. This was a girl in a police station, a minor. So the protest that happened after that judgment was handed down created a situation where the rape laws were rewritten, and finally the onus of proof was on the accused and not on the person who brings the accusation. So that was an important advance. There's another important law that came about for the protection of women in marriage, the section 498A, the addition to the penal code. Then, which was basically to protect women who are married from the violence that is faced due to dowry. If the woman doesn't bring dowry, then she is sent back home or given a lot of harassment. Even to this day, girls are killed because the boy's family are not, the groom's family are not satisfied with the kind of gifts that the family has given the girl at marriage. So that law was there, that is there. Then there's a Domestic Violence Act which was written because women said, I mean, there was a criminal act, but no other act. If you file a case against a criminal case against the husband's family, the marriage breaks. So the Domestic Violence Act was a civil law, which is thought up by the women's movement, lawyers and all that. And it's a civil law and gives protection. It's not punitive, but it protects the woman, and gives some rights like compensation and all that. And so these are all some of the advances. But the real and then there's also property and inheritance, but in a place where and the other thing is, there's one more thing: sexual harassment at the workplace. There's a law in place which is also inspired by another field experience. A woman who was carrying out some duties was in it was it annoyed the gender and the sexual the caste leaders, um, and and she was raped in retaliation for something for doing her duty. So, and then the case went up to court again. There was a very adverse judgment, and so NGOs started talking about it, working on it, and brought about a draft of laws to protect women at the workplace. So these are all the advancements of the feminist movement. How did that benefit women who don't have property, who don't have proper work or laws, and who are themselves, who are impune? The society can rape them, and there's no punishment for that. If as it is, even water sources are denied to these. I told you about housing, segregated housing for Dalits. Water sources are also segregated, and often they see to it that the water source there does not give water. If it's a well, it'll dry up, the water pump will not work, so they have to go looking for water here and there in the village. When they do that, the girls get sexually harassed or abused. So in such a context, and there's no punishment that ensues. Cases of rape that go up to court of Dalit women and girls, in fact, have a 2% conviction rate. In other non-Dalit girls, 25% rape convictions. So there's impunity in society, whether it's water, housing, work, labor. In such a context, what has been the agenda, the feminist agenda? Have they worked on these issues? No. And that is the reason. And so this is why we felt that what the agendas that, and one of the most important issues for me, at least, was a watershed, as a person who thinks and works in this area, was there was a very egregious case of 4 members of a Dalit family being lynched by a village, an entire village in a place called Khairlanji in Maharashtra. The two were boys, and then there were the mother and daughter. The mother and her 3 children, including a teenage girl and 2 boys. The boys were killed very badly, lynched, and then the women were also publicly stripped and beaten, and their bodies mutilated very seriously. Nobody reported about it, and finally the Dalits had to do something really violent, in the sense they attacked a train, a very very iconic train called Deccan Queen, which runs between Bombay and Pune. When that happened, then people took notice and said, "Why are the Dalits getting violent?" And then 1 week later, an FIR, that is a police report, was filed. And anyway, the case came to judgment. But I cannot forgive, for me personally, the silence of the women's movement on this violence. For me, that was the watershed. That is what makes it alive. That Indian women's movement does not consider the issues of Dalit women. Did not. I think now there is a bit more sensitivity to it. Yeah. Okay, so this is one side of the story. Then there's another story in which I discover how how I became how I discovered that my ancestry includes Dalits among my grandparents. 2 of my 4 grandparents are Dalit, and I had puzzling in my career. I used to do very well. I speak several languages. I have a lot of good writing and speaking skills. I'm good with people, so I'm quite effective in my work. So when it comes to actually being a contender for high positions, I make it right up to the top. But in a series of 4 or 5 instances or 3 or 4 or 5 years, I found that I make it right up to the top, but then I don't actually get the job. There's one in which I should have got that job because I was the only in a field of about 5 or 6 women. I was the only properly qualified, experienced, and trained person. But they gave it to a girl who had 1 year's experience. So this actually, made me understand that I'm being discriminated against for something. After that, I realized that the word Dalit was used in this context. Then I started inquiring, exploring over some years because Christians who are upwardly mobile, don't, I mean, if they are Dalit, they are not told that they are Dalit. And so I had to uncover it over a period of years. And then I realized that if people like me who had privilege, education, talent could be discriminated against, then what about those who don't have all these things? And that's when I jumped fully both feet into this with great joy, in fact. And because it finally I understand why things were happening to me and what I should do to become part of the solution, not the problem. And in the course of my work, I read and discuss. I organized a group in which a conference in which we talked about Dalit women leadership and beyond. So it's not enough to just include Dalit women, let them participate, give them representation, give them leadership. Not enough. They also have to become arbiters of what they are doing. So in this context, so we drafted the statement called the Dawn's Statement, the Dalit Women's Network for Solidarity. This is the name of the thing. I actually had lost it, Suraj. I had lost the content. It had been posted on a website of United Theological College in Bangalore. So while redoing their website, it had been taken off. I had not kept any copies. This was in 2006, before the internet actually became very popular. And then somebody asked me, can you find anything? Can you give me some material? So then I did a search. I found a cached copy, which I then quickly, uh, blocked and cut pasted into a Word document. And that's how that has been saved. I discovered it just a few days ago in Tenmori's house. And then we posted it on in one of the stories, one of the Dalit History Month stories. So it's on medium.com. You can read in that. In that, I have laid out my whole scheme of why womanism, as opposed to feminism, is the way women from marginalized sections in India need to go. I do talk about Dalit womanism in that document, but I have my thinking that was in 2016. Over the years, I have refined my thought. I wanted to make it more inclusive. So instead of saying Dalit womanism, because which excludes a lot of women who are also who are also marginalized and vulnerable. So now we are talking about marginalized Indian womanism, and this womanism has many congruences with the experiences of Black women and Latina women who call themselves mujerista, mujer of course meaning woman. So this is the way in which I discovered a new language as opposed to the term feminism for our movement. So that is why I named our session Rethinking Dalit Feminism. So this is with this I just want to stop here and invite any comments, responses. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. Thank you so much for enlightening us on various aspects. You talked about how patriarchy and Brahmanism work together and feed upon each other, a very incisive comment. And then you told us about this series stories of caste, intercaste violence, and the lynchings and the non-representation of Dalit voices in the stories, which is very much prominent in our own lifestyle. And that's why there is no intercaste romantic relations taking place on campus in various places because of these repercussions. You also very nicely introduced caste system, how Purushukta and how Rigveda kind of formalizes the caste system, and how Manu already existing practices he codified, and then Manusmriti was the law of the land for 2,500 years of India. So the law, a Shudra or a Dalit hears or sees some rituals being performed by Brahmins, their eyes would be taken off. And within this tyrannical 2,500 years regime of Brahmanism, we only have now, from 1950 onwards, a new sort of equal man, equal right formula being placed in India. Then you also talked about Akka Mahadevi, and I thought this was the most profound person that I have only got to know now, who actually protested against the discourses that we are talking now in recent years in the Western discourse. But Akka Mahadevi
Talked about it.
when
in the 12th century.
in the 12th century, damning the intimate violences that take place, and actually as a mark of first civil disobedience,
Tore off her clothes.
tearing off their clothes, and kind of relegating the very aspect of filthy and virile sexuality that is imposed on women's bodies. And I found this very revealing, and of course that's why this is again important. You also gave us discourse about the Dalit women being primarily engaged in manual scavenging, or the Devdasi system, very bad system. If no Devdasi, society would go to dogs. That's how desperate Devdasis are.
I just want to add here that in India, the Dalit, the women's movement has been split recently on this issue. So the mainstream women's movement wants to promote the legalization of prostitution, whereas women who are organizing, Dalit women and other marginalized sections, we are strongly against it. Now finally we have all taken positions on that. Up to now that was not the case. And the real reason, my question is, who's benefiting from this? From the sexual slavery of Dalit women, who's benefiting? I believe that the women in the privileged sections are benefiting because the men feel that they have to have access to these women, and they can pay for it. Anyway.
This was recently also last year in the conference in Nagpur also, where there was huge protest led by mostly leftist dominant caste women who called it as a labor and giving it a designated value, whereas Dalit women had protested.
Yeah.
And then you also talked about how economic aspects reproduce caste atrocities, and how economic is a very important and central aspect of a Dalit and as well as caste ecology. And then two important points you talked about: how feminist movement in India progressed without accounting to the historical atrocities and the realities of caste system by totally thwarting its focus from the. And that's why the Dalit women movement is very important for us to take stock of the social justice movement in India, and you are laying out the marginalized Indian women discourse as something that relates to the Black women movement and the Latina women movement. We'll open up for a very healthy dialogue. She's here. If you could please introduce yourself very briefly and then direct your question. Floor is open.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Rajashri. I'm upstairs in the South Asia Institute for 2 months, an artist. I wanted to ask you about a couple of questions, but first one, if we look at the Dalit movement in general being like primarily a Dalit men's movement, how do you feel Dalit women respond to the whole
I would say that women have not. It's not that women. It's not that women are not in the movement. I would say that they have their own movement, which is very powerful. It's not that they are responding or not responding. They are leaders themselves and have their own movement. But it's true that there is that we actually Suraj and I discussed this for a bit this morning, and there is an area of darkness there which needs to be unpacked, understood, and so proper solidarity is arrived at. Yeah, so there is a need for dialogue and approaching together, sitting together, discussing, recognizing each other's strengths. And
just for this audience, there's a coffee and there's some samosa. Please don't starve yourself. I just wanted to make that questions here. Teju, you wanted to ask something?
No, I was just telling you. Just because I don't want to be.
I have a question.
Yes.
My name is Bemisola. I'm at the AAAS Department of PhD. When you were talking, I was wondering, what's the population of, because I mean, since you say that a variation of the Brahminian, if I'll call it that, system still exists, what's the population of those at the top? What's the population of those at the bottom? And what's the population of the Dalit community that's seen as, separate from the rest of that hierarchized?
Yes. Yeah, that's a
Or-
that's a very fundamental question. Good question. According to our figures, I think these the so-called upper, even the dominant caste, the pure caste, the twice born, these caste communities, the number is about 15%. So there's an 15 to 85% difference. 15 is to 85 generally. And in within the marginalized community, I mean, so there are these constitute 15. Out of this 85, if you look at it from the overall, in the overall population, Dalits constitute 17%. More, the figure can vary in different states, in various provinces, but overall, for instance, in my state, recently that figure was not known, but a survey has been made. Now it is 19% population in Karnataka. They just released a caste survey. So overall, the census figures states that about 17% Dalits in the country, and the privileged community constitute 15%. Constitute 15%. But out of this, almost 100% of the judges are all Brahmins and upper caste or a dominant caste. Almost 70 to 80% of all the top administrative positions in the country are in these hands. So, in other words, and business, almost 100% of business, private sector business ownership is in the hands of the traditional trading community. So, those old patterns have persisted down the centuries.
So I have two questions, I promise. So the first is, at the time when the British were in power in India at the time, does this system exist? And did you have a situation in which those who were of a certain caste, the idea of maybe reincarnation, was there like a narrative
Yes.
that they could come back as members of the same caste, or
Yes.
would they be demoted because they didn't continue with their work as members of that particular caste? I'm just trying to put the idea of that sacred narrative together with when the British were there, what was going on at the time.
Yeah. See, it's a myth, of course, that the British were in control of the whole country all the time. That's not the case. We had something like 56 princely states where the British were not the rulers, but they were sort of vassals of the British. But they were independent states in India, at the time the British left. Even after the British left, there are some states which did not come into the Union for some years. Like Goa stayed out of the Union for some time. Hyderabad, the state of Hyderabad, did not join the Union for some time. So it was not a homogeneous political entity. There was some powers that the British had, which ran all over the state, but not everything. So that is one. And the other point is that the theory of reincarnation did operate till, I would say, at the time. In fact, to this day, I would say, because for example, when Gandhi was alive, he talks. His response to this caste system or its injustice was to say that untouchability is wrong. You should not impose manual scavenging on human beings. I will clean the toilets to demonstrate that it is not I will give dignity to the task by myself cleaning toilets. So he used to do that. But he used to write and say how it, by carrying out their duties faithfully, how they will fulfill their job of being a good Harijan. He used the term Harijan. Harijan means children of God, which actually means bastard, but the father is not known. So people objected to that term, and so they said, we won't want that. We want the word Dalit. Dalit means broken. So the community self chose this term and rejected what Gandhi said. So Modi said the same thing. Now, just after he took over, he wrote a little booklet in which he says that we find that in India, manual scavengers see their job as a spiritual duty. So it is. He wrote a book. He recently issued a pamphlet after he became the prime minister. So believe me, it is a very influential, persistent philosophy or thought process.
finally, you said that there were some protests. Did anybody put up their hand?
ahead.
Okay,
After you, no problem.
Okay, so you talked about some the protest religions that had come out of, in protest of that system. I wonder to what degree those new religions must have influenced or impacted laws and policies till
Not
this
really.
day.
See, those were actually with the people. They were not among the powerful. So they were basically protests, and they were basically cultural and philosophical protests. And so people wrote their songs and tried to live out their practices. It did not become very mainstream. And eventually, the dominant groups, took over those kind of things by retelling the stories. For instance, there is one very influential uh, such saint poet known as Kabir. And even to this day, in fact, Ambedkar's family were Kabir Panthis. So they are people who believe in what Kabir talked about. They sing their songs and use his material as scriptures. And so the story, these people said that there was one saint, Ramdas, I think, who became he lay on the steps of the river, on the steps leading to the river one day, and because he wanted to become that, Kabir wanted to become that saint's disciple. And so when the saint tripped over him in the dark, in the dawn, and he said Rama, that is the name of God. No? He was startled and he said Rama. Then Kabir claimed, the story goes, that he claimed, because you said Rama to me, you've given me the Ram mantra, so I'm your disciple. So this is nothing but Brahmanizing, the influence of Kabir. So similar stories are told of even Basveshwara. I told you that his religion was taken away by this Brahmanizing influence. So throughout Brahman, it has been successful in even co-opting Buddha as the ninth avatar of Vishnu. So it has this capacity to appropriate, like patriarchy. Any protest movement or any differential thing, it corrects itself and tries to overcome it by like an amoeba, it just molds itself into that. So yeah, that's it. Yeah, your question.
So two questions. One was, I grew up in India, but I didn't really think very much about this, but until I started doing survey work in Bihar, and we had to go find households in villages, and the way to do it is to ask for the last name, because based on the last name, they know which part of the household village they live in. And so...
Say that again, which part of the village they live in.
Yeah.
So the village is arranged according to the caste.
Right, exactly. And your caste is given your last name is a death giveaway for caste, right? So first, one question was, I think it was in Bihar where I think given that you can educate yourself and all of that, but if caste is a giveaway and to some extent your prospects are just dictated by how everybody else treats you, like it seems like your name is a serious constraint. And so I think there is in Bihar, but a lot of people to change their name to something that's like not a giveaway of caste. And I don't know, is that a broader movement in India, like for Dalits to change their last name so that you can no longer be identified as Dalit just by your name?
See, there are contradictory trends. The reality is that for Dalits it's a liability, but for most people for most people who benefit from the system, it's an asset. So if you're a Sharma or a Mishra or a Chatterjee or I think you are definitely given a lot of respect. Jain. So the dominant caste surname. If you bear a dominant caste surname, and automatically you gain a certain social standing or status. So it can cut both ways depending on how your caste how your caste is seen in the hierarchy. So it could yeah. But in this case, yes, definitely I would say that. See, one of the ways Dalits have dealt with this migrate from the villages to the cities, because there after that you become more or less anonymous. So I've seen a lot of people take names like Singh or Kumar, which means Singh, Rao, Singh, Kumar. These are names that had taken on by very many. So they become neutral,
and in Bihar it's Kumar. that's a lot of people changed it.
Change it like that.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
And then the second thing that I thought,
But I haven't finished.
Oh,
In Tamil Nadu, there was also this non-Brahmin movement, and in Tamil Nadu, the caste name was often used as a surname, as part of the name, like Kamaraj Nadar. The name was Kamaraj Nadar is a well-known politician from South India. So then there was a move to take away all the caste names, and the first name, so the father's name was initialized or a village name was given, but the first name was used as the name. So that also happened.
and then the other thing was specifically about thinking about women. So this is not based on any large scale, but one perception was actually in our surveys when we tried to talk to upper caste women, it was often harder to get to them. They were behind parda, they do that a lot, and often they would not speak, and the husband would speak on their behalf and all of that. And it was actually often more in the Musar Tola, which is the Dalit section on the outskirts of the village, for example, in Bihar. Women came across as much more confident, and they were working, which may be some partly to do with the economic situation and all that. And like I said, this was a small perception. I don't know at all if this is, but do you have some sense whether within their own communities, Dalit women have a sort of different relationship to men than within upper caste communities?
Obviously, there because of the economic aspects, there will be some difference, of course, because women also earn and all that. That's one. The other thing is that there some amount of mobility is accorded to them, which for economic reasons, because of which they are more mobile and able to be more confident. That's true. And of course, their voice, they also have a lot of voice, but this is a very relative term in a relative context, maybe within the family, but not much more than that, because otherwise their political, economic standing continues in the society to be very vulnerable. On the other hand, where the other women are concerned, women from dominant groups, it's true that they have parda, but they have benefits and also subjugation at the same time.
Yes.
If I can just add to that, when we talk about mobility, it's also something to do with upper caste women's sexuality is guarded more,
Yes.
because that is how the caste perpetuates. But Dalit women's sexuality is not, because that's not something which would.
And this is the other side of the story that I was talking about, the impunity that follows the rape of Dalit women.
Mhm.
This is the flip side of that. She's right. Yes. Yes.
Who was it? Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I ask where you spoke in Atlanta? I used to live there.
Oh, you okay? I spoke in two places. One was at Candler School of Theology
Oh, okay.
within Mary,
Mhm.
and I also went to Columbia Theological Seminary.
Okay. Yeah. I used to teach at Spelman College in Atlanta for many years. And the reason I asked that is that what you were saying was very familiar to me about the critique that Black women feminists have made about the priorities and the blind spots of mainstream white feminism.
Absolutely.
And the ways that it replicated, even down to like these issues of rape and prostitution and the way that they're tied into socioeconomic class and everything.
Absolutely.
And so it was such an amazing thing to hear that parallel in another context. And the other question I guess I had was when B.R. Ambedkar converted to Buddhism, and many people converted to Buddhism, what happened after that? Was there any, if people had been known to be, Dalit prior to this, were they able to escape the stigma and the constraints of this? Did it follow them into the new religion? Or did their social status in any way change as a result of that?
Okay. I have to say two things to both questions. I agree with what you just said about the I mean, with to your remark about the parallels that you see between what Black women experienced and what I'm talking about. I've written about that whole thing in an article called A Name of Our Own. I've posted it on academia.edu under my name, please. Yeah, you can access it there. Because I think it's important that if you read that, then you'll see the process of how it all came about, how that terminology, how women found their own name. I think that's important. Along with
What was
other,
the title again?
A Name of Our Own.
A Name of Our Own.
It's actually taken from a Latina woman's article, of the same name, which she writes when she finds name Mujerista for her women's experience. The point you made about Buddhism, actually, what I did not mention perhaps is that I think, mention that conversion to a different religion was one of the ways, apart from migration, conversion was one of the ways in which Dalits tried to improve their life. Because if they converted uh, into the Christian religion during the time, during colonial times, though I must say that the colonials, actually the powers that be, did not actually encourage this. The East India Company was a commercial company and did not want to trouble the mainstream people. What happened was that missionaries used to come, both Catholic and Protestant, and they used to start schools, do literacy work, do health work, and that attracted a lot of people into the Christian faith. Apart from, so that was that was the option they exercised. After Ambedkar came, he studied various religions for 20 to 30 years before making the decision to um, convert to Buddhism. And so he studied Islam, Sikhism, Christianity, and only after that he chose to go back to the founding tenets of Buddhism and then, announce that as the liberative form. This was the story. So after he converted, I said, no, there was this mass of 500,000 people also converted with him. So there has been some lasting impact, at least on the community he was born into, which is the Mahar community. And it is quite a popular, uh, uh, it has grown, the Mahar Buddhist community has grown very large. They call themselves Ambedkarite. There's lots of people who grew in that faith, generations, people who converted with Ambedkar, they are now having grandchildren. So 3 generations have come. So it has grown in its own way. But then there has been another perception, because Brahmanism is not actually seriously threatened, I believe, by conversion to Buddhism, because they have succeeded in appropriating Buddha into the canon, into the pantheon. They have made him I told you about this God, the avatars of God, which Fule wrote about. So they made him the 9th avatar of Vishnu.
So why is he in the hierarchy? I'm sorry.
It's the Brahmins' way of appropriating Buddha's heritage. That's one way of doing it. So that even they'll say, no problem, even if you convert, because ultimately they feel that they need to be in control. And so if Buddhism is not, they say it's an Indic religion, it is born in India, so it is not an outside religion. The difference is Islam and Christianity, the perception is that they are religions which were based in places outside of the geographic location of, so those are objectionable, whereas because Buddhism was born in Indian soil, it's not a threat anymore. So that's the thing. So it's something they can handle. What they can't handle is this, because then the larger context comes in. No, so there is a larger Christian population outside in the rest of the world. There's a larger Muslim population outside in the rest of the world, who will then begin to become, supportive to these minorities. So that is the thing. That is the real thing.
Thanks for coming and speaking to us.